Hello and welcome to Emma's ESL English. This week we're gonna talk about tea. Oh yeah. I don't like tea. I don't like tea. I don't like coffee. I don't like Coca-Cola. I drink a lot of water. A lot. I do like hot chocolate. I also don't drink alcohol. But my drinking preferences are peculiar, considering where I come from. So here's the thing. British people are obsessed with tea. Totally and utterly obsessed. It's a big part of our culture and it's a big part of the working environment as well. So what I thought we'd do is this week talk about tea at 3 different levels. So we talked a few weeks ago about the different mealtime names in English, and some of that is related to our history of tea. So I'm going to start today by going into a bit of a history of tea in the UK so that we have some background for why we're nuts about it. Then tomorrow I'm going to talk a little bit about in the office etiquette around drinks and tea, because there most definitely is an etiquette around that, and I could imagine it would be very confusing, but also I'm really curious whether this exists in your country too. Maybe not for tea, maybe it's for something else. And then on the Thursday, I'm gonna look at conversations that happen while tea is being made. So again, this depends on where you are. In America, you might have these conversations at the water cooler if you're getting a drink of water. There may be a coffee machine in your office. There may be a whole staff room in your office that has a coffee machine, a water cooler, and a kettle all in the same place. In the UK, that's often the case, although coffee machines are relatively rare, I would say, in a lot of offices. However, there is always a kettle. So a lot of our conversations, small talk conversations in the office, happen around the kettle when various different people are making tea for their teams, which we'll cover on Wednesday. So I'm going to look at those kind of conversations and also how to leave those kind of conversations, because it's very possible that you're going to get stuck there for the rest of the day. Being able to leave is important. Okay, so that's our 3-day plan for tea. If you think there's more to talk about, let me know and we'll look at that too. So today, we're talking about the history of tea. I am going to just jump right over the thousands of years of tea history in China, because it's a lot. Y'all have been making tea for a really long time. The Brits didn't discover tea until like 350 years ago. We are babies in the world of tea. I get that. I totally get that. But we're talking about British tea obsessions. So I'm going to jump over the Chinese history, but acknowledge it's a big history and there's a lot more to this whole tea thing than the Brits ever have any concept or idea about. I'm also going to put a map on the blog that shows you the parts of the world that use the word chai and the parts of the world that use the word tea, which is quite an interesting way to see how tea moved around the world, which has affected its name. But certainly in the UK we call it tea. It seems like the Portuguese were the first Europeans to start drinking tea while they were living in Asia. But then the Dutch were the ones who were trading backwards and forwards, and they were the first to bring the tea home with them. So the Dutch were the first ones to actually start drinking the tea. And in the UK, we just pretended it wasn't happening. It was a royal who set the new tea drinking trend. It's very common that something that royals do, everybody wants to do. Christmas trees is another great example. Queen Victoria's husband, Albert, brought the idea of Christmas trees back from his home country of Germany, and we loved it. So we now have Christmas trees at Christmas time. We stole it. We love what royal people do, no matter how much we love or hate the royals in our country, we still love everything they do. It was actually a Portuguese princess whose name was Catherine, and she married Charles II all the way back in 1661. The Portuguese were drinking tea before any other Europeans, so Catherine was already an addicted tea lover before she married Charles. But then she came to the UK, and of course her obsession became everybody's obsession. First, the people she was hanging out with at court, which is all the royal people, and then all the rich people. But it was still not very easy for normal people to drink tea because it was super expensive. It was coming all the way from China. We already had coffee houses, and the coffee houses started to serve tea too, mostly to nobility and rich people, but it was really highly taxed, so poor people just could not afford it at all. Now, I apologize to all the Chinese and Japanese people listening. You would be horrified by the way that they were brewing tea in the coffee houses in Britain. Please forgive us and bear in mind that the people brewing tea in the coffee houses in Britain were used to brewing coffee, and they had no idea what to do with this new leaf. So it's not surprising that they were quite horrible to it. At that time, the tea was taxed as a liquid rather than a leaf. So they would brew the tea in the morning. The taxman would pop round, see how much tea they'd brewed, and charge them their tax for that barrel of tea that they'd brewed for the day. Then they would use that barrel of tea to serve all the tea for the day. It seems like it was really likely that you could pop in at 6 o'clock at night and the tea you would have to drink would have been brewed at 6 in the morning. God knows how terrible it tasted. Anyway, again, my apologies to the people who actually like tea and know how it should be brewed. It's not surprising that we messed that up. But luckily, the men weren't the only people drinking tea. The ladies were also drinking tea. They were a little bit more refined. The ladies were not going out to drink tea, of course not. The ladies were staying at home because they never left their houses unless they were going to another lady's house. So they were staying at home and they were using loose leaf tea and china cups and making it super cute and adorable and probably making it taste way better too. So not everybody was having bad tea at the time. It was really highly taxed at this point in time, which meant that tea became really big business in the smuggling world, which led to a lot of crime and also a lot of people making things that looked like tea and selling them to you. Sound familiar? Drug world? In 1784, the Prime Minister at the time, William Pitt the Younger, he was a really famous Prime Minister. We're starting to get into the time where the British public was starting to turn on the idea of slave trade. So William Wilberforce worked closely with William Pitt the Younger to try and abolish the slave trade. We're not there at this point, but things are happening with the slave trade, but that's not related to the tea trade. So in 1784, William cut the tax from 119% down to 12.5%, which of course then made it affordable for everybody. And since all the poor people knew that all the rich people had been loving and drinking tea for like years, they were fast to jump on this bandwagon. We had this really big company called the East India Company. They were one of the most powerful shipping companies in the world. In 1834, they no longer held a monopoly on trade with China. So they took some tea trees and went off to India. We're glossing over enormous historical points here to focus on a drink. In the 1800s, tea was drunk at breakfast, and then it was also drunk throughout the day by pretty much everybody once that tax had gone. Writers such as Charles Dickens and Jane Austen often mention it in their novels. So remember a few weeks ago when we were talking about meals, we talked about tea at two different points, right? We talked about afternoon tea and using the word tea to describe your evening meal. Afternoon tea, there was this duchess in 1841 who was hungry. That's basically what it comes down to. Lunch was at 1, dinner was at 7, girl was starving. So she decided to have tea in the afternoon. And she'd have tea with the pretty cakes and everything. And she'd invite her friends over. And her friends thought, ooh, this is a nice idea. So then everybody started having afternoon tea. So it really became a really popular thing as an afternoon snack. And there's books written on the etiquette of tea. So I suppose when it comes to afternoon tea, in the late 1800s, we perhaps could rival the Japanese tea making ceremony, but instead of having a ceremony of making tea, we have a ceremony of eating cakes and sandwiches and biscuits. Not quite the same thing. The second meal we talked about was having the word tea used to describe your evening meal. And I never really knew where this came from. As I mentioned in the previous episode, the common thing at that time was that dinner was your main meal, and it was a hot meal, and it was in the middle of the day. My grandfather was a farmer, my uncles are farmers, so that's why in my grandma's house, this has remained the same. So for the farmers, that was normal. But then we started to industrialize, and we had a lot of different kinds of things. For example, mining. My town is a mining town. So you're not coming home for lunch. It's not happening. They renamed and moved the meal. So the hot meal of the day was no longer in the middle of the day for these groups of people, but instead at the end of the working day, and it was called high tea, and it was strong tea and then hot food. That's why we have different words for different things. The end. Woo! Turns out there's a lot of history of tea in the UK. Tomorrow, how do you make your tea? If you have any questions about this or anything else related to English, you can email me at emmaseslenglish@gmail.com. I will put some of the information from this on the blog at emmaseslenglish.com, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.